Donald Trump is saying the quiet part out loud today when it comes to exactly why Todd Blanche still has not put an official end to the almost $1.8 million slush fund that could potentially award payouts to January 6 insurrectionists. With the stroke of a pen, Todd Blanche could clear the way to being confirmed as the Attorney General of the United States by simply meeting the demands of Republican Senators Thom Tillis and John Cornyn and putting an end to the fund officially and in writing. But if there were any lingering open questions as to why he hasn't done that and where the resistance to doing that lies, Trump solved that mystery for us today. He made clear that keeping the fund alive is more important to him than getting his own completely sycophantic attorney general and former personal defense attorney confirmed by the United States Senate, writing this quote, John Cornyn never had a problem with the so-called fund, which will not benefit me, but rather the great American patriots who were hunted down like dogs and whose lives were unfairly and illegally destroyed until after I decided to endorse and support his Republican primary opponent in Texas. Perhaps there has never been a group of people treated so badly in our nation's history. They are still suffering still, many ruined, and I felt that they should be given compensation for what's been done to them. When pressed today in his cabinet meeting as to why he wouldn't put an end to the slush fund in writing in order to get his guy, Todd Blanche, confirmed, Trump tried to claim that Blanche has repeatedly said the fund is dead. But then he added this.
Well, it is dead, but, I wish it weren't, to be honest with you. I think people were horribly treated, horribly abused. This has nothing to do with Todd. This was me. Horribly abused, and I'd like to see them compensated for the pain. I wasn't covered by that fund. I don't want to be covered by the fund. I probably was abused more than anybody in the history of our country. They went down for an innocent journey.
He went down on an innocent journey that included defecating inside the United States Capitol, beating cops to within inches and seconds of their lives, tasing cops, beating cops with flagpoles, ransacking the United States Capitol, obstructing an official proceeding, and threatening the life of Donald Trump's own Vice President, Mike Pence. Okay. But that digging in on defending the criminals who did those things and the blatant signaling that Trump wants this fund alive and kicking is what is blocking Blanche's promotion and keeping his confirmation at an impasse, despite Todd Blanche's best efforts to placate or perhaps spin, lie, obfuscate to the two Republican holdouts. Tillis, for his part, sort of shot back at Trump today, writing this, quote, the president has made it clear today that the so-called anti-weaponization fund is still alive, which is exactly why we are attempting to formally end it. Anyone who attacked law enforcement should still be in prison, not getting a check from the federal government. It's a shame Blanche's confirmation that his hit a snag only because an incompetent personal advisor to the president refuses to amend the bogus settlement. Now, further evidence this afternoon that the fund is still alive and that Trump is that incompetent personal assistant. Trump's appealing the order by a judge earlier this month that found he acted in bad faith when it came to the larger settlement here, that IRS settlement that creates the slush fund, along with granting him and his kids broad tax immunity from past and future acts. Donald Trump putting his slush fund and his personal benefits above the confirmation of his attorney general nominee is where we start today with some of our favorite experts and friends. Former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Harry Litman's here. He's the host of the Talking Feds podcast. Also joining us, former Assistant Special Agent in Charge at the FBI and National Security and Intelligence Analyst for us, Michael Feinberg's back, and former Deputy White House Press Secretary during Donald Trump's first term, now spokesperson for the Home of the Brave campaign, Sarah Matthews is here. Sarah, I have been quoting you, I hope your ears have been burning every day this week, for being the person who said in your January 6th testimony that Donald Trump, you heard him say, I can't believe I lost to this effing guy. I've quoted it in the context of Jay Clayton not being able to utter the word WON when it comes to Joe Biden in 2020. But it reminds me of this, this phony impasse. This isn't an impasse. Donald Trump refuses to put the confirmation of Todd Blanche ahead of a slush fund for the insurrectionists and broad immunity for himself from the IRS.
Yeah, it's because he sees that the January 6th insurrectionists did nothing wrong. He actually likes that they were fighting for him. And just hearing him say that they're victims of government abuse, and then him going on to say that he actually has been treated the worst in the history of this country, it's not just historically inaccurate, it's downright offensive. Look, America has a long history of injustices. You look at things like the Trail of Tears, Japanese internment, slavery. I mean, the list goes on of things that we could look at where I'm pretty sure those Americans were treated a lot worse off. And I look at the treatment of the January 6th defendants specifically, and I think that they got the treatment they deserve because they were criminals. They defiled the Capitol. They brutally beat police officers. And so, you know what? Those are the real victims in this instance, where you look at the 140 police officers who were brutally beaten that day. But Donald Trump doesn't see it that way. And for a party that likes to claim that they back the blue and law enforcement, it's really annoying to see only Tillis and Cornyn being the ones sticking their necks out on this issue. So I will give them credit where credit's due. But shame on all of those other senators, particularly the ones who were in the Capitol that day, who aren't speaking up about this as well.
Michael Feinberg, what does it do inside the department to have Donald Trump advocating for payouts for basically violent insurrectionists, in some instances, people convicted of seditious conspiracy?
In any normal administration, in any normal time, there would be an immense uprising within the Department of Justice that Donald Trump was, and let's not mince words, financially rewarding crime. There's no other way to express what he's doing. But we're in an era where DOJ has lost large percentages. I've seen some statements up to a quarter of its entire workforce because people realized long before this that it was not going to be true to its principles and its leadership was not going to be true to their oath of office and have already left. So I think you're going to have a lot of DOJ who is there trying to do the right thing, very much infuriated by this, but they've been infuriated for 18 months now. And the upper levels of DOJ, people like Blanche and the cronies he's put into place to carry out Trump's political errands, they're going to see nothing wrong with it. If they saw nothing wrong with it, they would have advised him against starting the fund. If he insisted on continuing it, they would have resigned in principle. The people who are left in the nicest offices at the RFK buildings are not one iota an improvement on the morality of Trump himself.
Harry, I don't want to lose the larger sort of frame that the corrupt slush fund is plugged into. I mean, the senators should be equally upset about the corrupt settlement. I mean, the judge has already said it may be illegal because you can't represent both sides, that it's not a settlement if both sides are on Trump's side.
Yeah, I mean, that's really not a close question, Nicole. Judge Williams did say it's collusive, and of course it's collusive when you're trading something worth zero for something worth $1.776 billion and then some. And I think it's understood that way within the department. It's also seemed Cornyn and Tillis, I think, were offering a pretty easy way out. And this is a vivid demonstration of where Trump's priorities are. He cares more about this slush fund than he does about his attorney general. I think that won't go unnoticed within the department, and it sort of deflates Blanche somewhat. And then going forward, that's where the fight is, not over Blanche, and that just, I think, is really brought home to whoever remains in the department. And it would have been so straightforward. It's really telling that Trump is putting his foot down and saying no. It's almost a ready-made political commercial, right? These are the most harmed people in the country. Cut to the TV that we all saw with people storming the Capitol. He's all in on this narrative that just contradicts everything we all saw.
You know, Sarah, I wonder if you can weigh in. I mean, here's just some of the instances. He did it today at a cabinet meeting. But here are all the instances where he finds it important to defend, again, convicted felons in a lot of instances, the violent insurrectionists on January 6th.
Those J6 warriors, they were warriors, but they were really more than anything else. They're victims of what happened. All they were doing is protesting a rigged election. That's what they were doing. And then the police say, go in, go in, go in. They were treated like the worst criminals in history. And you know what they were there for? They were protesting the vote because they knew the election was rigged and they were protesting the vote. Some of those people went down to the Capitol. I said, peacefully and patriotically, nothing done wrong at all, nothing done wrong. We didn't have guns. The others had guns, but we didn't have guns. And when I say we, these are people that walked down. This was a tiny percentage of the overall, which nobody sees and nobody shows. But that was a day of love.
So there are lots of public-facing proof points of his decline, performatively, perhaps cognitively, I don't know. This feels like the inability to stop talking about an event, again, that took place on live television, where it was his supporters who were beating the cops, where there was no love, certainly, that was obvious to anybody watching the crimes take place on live television. They also had their days in court. I mean, everyone that was convicted not by Democrats, not by the Biden administration, not by Merrick Garland, but by juries made up of their peers, and the vast majority of them pleaded guilty to receive lighter sentences. Why do you think he can't stop talking about it?
You know, I think that Donald Trump has always been a broken man, but I do think that him losing the 2020 election fair and square to Joe Biden permanently broke his brain. I don't think he's ever been able to recover from that, because he looked at someone like Joe Biden and thought, how could I lose to this guy? I mean, he called him, Sleepy Joe. And then obviously it affected him because he's a narcissist. His ego won't allow him to see the facts for what they are, that there was no election fraud and that it was Joe Biden who was the winner of the 2020 election. And so he's been fixated on this topic and talking about the election, talking about the January 6th rioters, because he saw them as fighting for him when he felt like no one else was fighting for him.